In higher ed, we're all looking for big wins, but reducing a 75% application abandonment rate and achieving a 90% conversion rate, that's next level transformation. Michael Bettersworth, CMO at Texas State Technical College, shares how they achieved this by streamlining the application process with Element 451.
Our Element journey began out of a necessity. We were switching to a new SIS, and the application process was going to pose some real usability issues for us. We felt that application was going to hamper our enrollment. So we began quickly to evaluate different CRMs, different applications. So for context on that, our conversion rate with the prior application had about 75% abandonment of people clicking apply to submit. And the first weeks after going live with Element, we saw an 80% conversion, and that's now up to 90. So improving the usability of that application on the front end process has had a significant advance in our intake.
When technology works for students, it works for you. Visit element451.com to see how simplifying the application process with artificial intelligence will lead to significant results for your institution.
Hit it! That's what I'm talking about. Wait!
Okay, now, from the beginning.
Hit it, boys.
Welcome to Advancement Amplified, AI for IA, a special 5-part pulse check series brought to you by Enrollify. I'm Dan Giroux, a higher education marketing and communications leader focused on elevating the strategic impact of advancement. Advancement is at a pivotal moment. With shifting donor expectations, alumni engagement challenges, financial pressures, and the demand to do more with less, AI has emerged a transformative force. It offers unprecedented opportunity to reshape and amplify how teams connect, strategize, and deliver results. In this series, we'll explore how AI can be integrated without overwhelming staff, balancing efficiency with authentic human connections, and unlocking strategic innovations for the future. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to Advancement Amplified, AI for IA, a special 5-part pulse check series brought to you by Enrollify. I'm your host, Dan Giroux, and in this series, we're diving deep into how artificial intelligence is reshaping the world of institutional advancement. Advancement is at a pivotal moment. With shifting donor expectations, financial pressures, and increasing demands on teams to do more with less, AI presents an incredible opportunity to reimagine engagement, strategy, and execution. And to kick off this series, I'm thrilled to be joined by 2 senior leaders in advancement. Matthew Lambert, Senior Vice President for University Advancement at William & Mary and CEO of the William & Mary Foundation, and Dan Frezza, Chief Advancement Officer of Institutional Advancement at the College of Charleston and CEO of the College of Charleston Foundation. Before we get into AI, I'd love for our audience to learn a little more about your professional relationship. Matthew and Dan, how did you first connect, and what have been some of the key moments throughout that collaboration?
Yeah, Dan. So I'll jump in first. I arrived at William & Mary about 14 years ago. And so right after 2010, I think, and worked for about a year and a half in the annual giving team here. And then about a year and a half, 2 years into that stint, one of William & Mary's own came home in Matthew Lambert as the head of institutional advancement, university advancement. And Matthew and I worked together. I would consider him both a boss, a mentor, and a friend. Worked with him from annual giving up to a senior leadership team. Took on advancement services, some foundation work, and then other parts of university development until about 2 years ago. 2 years ago this month, I went to the College of Charleston to become their Chief Executive Officer for the Foundation, Chief Advancement Officer for University Advancement. And I'll let Matthew talk a little bit about not just his past, but he and I have worked together on a host of technology partnerships together and even in the last couple of years.
Yeah, Dan, my return to William & Mary was about 12 years ago, first time vice president. And I was really trying to think differently about how institutional advancement teams could be structured and wanted to think differently about annual giving in particular. And so one of my first moves here was to elevate the head of annual giving to be not just a sort of a senior position, but to be a direct report to the vice president. And Dan was the first person I hired as an AVP for, we called it Lifetime Philanthropic Engagement and Annual Giving. It was one of the longest titles in organizational history. But more than that, really, we aimed to make annual giving a much bigger part, a more consistent part of the work we're doing, to take a long view on this. And so I gave Dan a pretty ambitious goal, which was to imagine how to reach 40% participation, which was unheard of amongst public universities. And to his credit, Dan very quickly said, I don't know how we're going to do that, but I'll figure it out. And he went back and methodically built a plan for us to really dramatically increase annual giving participation. And we've, as he said, worked together both here at William & Mary, but also now in his work at College of Charleston, continue to collaborate on a number of projects. And some of those we'll chat about today, which are really built around AI as a way to innovate in our profession.
Terrific. Well, thanks so much for that background. I'd love to take a step back a little bit and set the stage for our audience, some who work within advancement, some who work alongside advancement, some who are maybe more than a few degrees removed. Could you each share how your institution defines and structures its advancement function?
Sure. And as you know, Dan, every institution is a little bit different in how they think about it. And the big broad name advancement is the ideal is that we're all advancing our institutions forward in a variety of ways. At William & Mary, that includes alumni engagement, annual giving, major gift development, or major principal gift development work. And we have a couple of other functions here that the president's added recently, which have really created great synergy. So we have university marketing, we have university communications, we have career services, which have been a real bolstering of the historic work we've been doing. And then, of course, advancement services and innovation is really undergirding all of these programs together. But we've taken a pretty broad definition of institutional advancement here at William & Mary.
Matthew, would you give a sense of what that approximate headcount looks like?
Sure. We're right at 300 with all of those functions together. And we're also in the early phases of the leadership phase of a comprehensive campaign. So we've been growing as a result.
Terrific.
Yeah, we're quite a bit opposite, other than being old and public. That's about where it stops. We're in an evolutionary state. So we too are in a leadership phase of a campaign. When I arrived there 2 years ago, we had a head count of about 37. And that included a few positions that had been sacrificed during the pandemic, where those lines going to keep staff in retentionary states. We are approaching 52 now, just in 2 years, so pretty significant growth, and the hope is to be at 60 by the end of this fiscal year. We have added to the advancement track university events. That's a first tackling of our division to take on that institutional-wide brand in terms of engagement and events. But we have also the traditional alumni association, alumni engagement, development. We have a presidential and principal gift office, annual giving office, advancement services, communications team, and then obviously our foundation staff.
One of the questions that I get asked because of my background and experience in advancement is, what's the best setup, right, for where marketing communications should live? And there really isn't a single answer to that. There's so much nuance and variables that are unique to each institution. So interesting for our audience to hear how both of you have it structured. And I'm sure that will continue to evolve, as you mentioned, with the campaign in front of you.
Yeah, Dan, I'll just on that real fast. It has been interesting for me, having worked at a couple different institutions where marketing and communications are sometimes together, sometimes separate, and they're sometimes within advancement and sometimes outside of advancement. Now at William & Mary, we have both of those functions within university advancement. And it's been a real boost to our efforts in a lot of ways. As you know, our work in advancement is really around supporting the strategic initiatives of the president and really moving those forward. And so to have that aligned with the overall marketing communications functions has just allowed us to do a lot more than we've ever been able to do before. So, you can make it work in a number of different ways, but I have loved having all of this together in one place now.
And I would echo, having lived in a world for a dozen years where that was present, to now the last 2 years where advancement communications is something I had to build, the institutional-wide marketing and communications separate. That is probably one of the pain points I've experienced the most in the rapid pace of getting things done, because you've got to not just work with partnerships, but you got to work with partnerships every day to make sure they understand your vision, what you're trying to do, your strategy, versus when they're a part of the team, I took it for granted how important that was until the last couple of years.
Yeah.
As we start to get a little bit more into the technology conversation here, I'm curious, with so many changes taking place at such a rapid pace, to your point there, Dan, things are changing almost every day. It seems like a new AI model is overtaking the previous leader from the day before. Advancement's going to need to evolve. It's going to need to embrace these types of tools and technologies. How are your teams changing in response to what's become available in recent years?
So my opinion on this is really bolstered by our president, who talks about our university advancement team as being the innovation sandbox. And what she really means by that is she encourages and loves that we try things out. We experiment with them, we see what works, and then we tweak from there. And we have found with AI the ability to try and experiment and to get people beyond their early fears, because I think there are lots of fears, some that are unfounded, but some that are worthy and understandable, has helped our team to become more comfortable that we can find ways to use AI to expand the reach of our staff. And while I think there will always be concerns about replacing human beings, there are a number of ways that AI can do lower order functions that free up our staff to do more meaningful, more impactful, higher order functions that really, again, expand the reach of our team. So that's some of what we can talk about today, is just some of the ways we've begun to experiment with that and try it out. And I know Dan has a similar philosophy.
Yeah. Most, I would say, if you go back even 20 years, advancement shops that have been leading, in my eyes, have always been leapfrogging and leading in terms of technology. So this is just another chapter in the old book. One of the things that we said, Matthew and I were together recently doing this for a small conference, and I started the conversation around AI with first our audience understanding two types of AI, because those are two very different approaches we're taking. Experiential AI, which is really about the internal operations, efficiency, effectiveness, things that allow, whether it's automation-based AI or whether it's, frankly, the machine doing a job that a human now can refocus to do a job and use their time differently on. These are things that are ChatGPT type folks. Then there's the autonomous AI. And that's truly, I think, where Matthew's thinking about from a workforce development. That is really not replacing the human, but offering the machine to do a job that a human is doing so that that human can do a different job within the organization or beyond the reach that an organization can have. Matthew has nearly 300 lines in his organization. That's still not enough to reach every single member of the William & Mary community. I've got a smaller number of that, and we have the same size alumni base. Matthew, our alumni undergraduate degree holding is about 70,000. What's William & Mary's today?
It's about 110,000 alumni.
So we have, I think our total alumni count is 100,000. So we are very similar in terms of the number of alumni, yet he's got twice or three times the number of staff. I have smaller, and we both need something to reach more people.
Yeah, Dan, if I can just put numbers on that just to give you some sense. Last year at William & Mary, we had about 31,000 donors, and about 10,000 of those are managed by a major gift officer in some form or fashion. And that means there's a lot of people that are getting relatively little personal touch. And so we want to find ways to expand the reach to find some kind of personal touch with a lot of those individuals who either are already giving or might potentially give. The other thing that we've talked a lot about is that generationally, you see dramatic differences in how alumni, friends, donors want to engage with the university. Generations ago, the Alumni magazine was a robust point of connection for many, many alumni. And on the back of that magazine, half of it would be class notes where people would send in updates about families, children, and work. And if you look at class notes today, that's dramatically shrunken. Why? Tools like Facebook have allowed people to stay connected in real time. And when the Alumni magazine comes out 3 to 6 months later, that information is dated. And so we have younger generations that far prefer electronic forms of communication to the printed Alumni magazine. But we try to find the right way with different generations to connect. Very similarly, generations ago, you would pick up the phone and call an alumnus and you would talk to them on the phone. Today, if you've ever tried to call a Gen Z alum or one of your children, you know that they don't answer the phone. They are not likely to want to talk on the phone. They want to connect in different ways. And so whether it's email or text messages or AI autonomous agents reaching out, we know we've got to find different ways to connect with different generations.
Matthew, when would you say that William & Mary's journey into some of this technology really began? It sounds like there's a culture that embraces it and encourages it versus some institutions where they might be more risk averse. We've got to run everything through legal. We're not at a place where we can even introduce text messaging to our alumni and donors. Can you give us a sense of sort of the background and how that has supported this embrace of innovation?
Sure. And ironically, William & Mary is 332 years old. So we are the second oldest college in America and the first university in America. And many people would assume that would lead to an overly traditional approach to everything that we do. And my opinion about this is that we've got to continue to push the boundaries of what's possible and continue to find new ways to do the work that we're doing. I am in this profession now more than 25 years, and sadly, very little has changed in our profession. When I first started, we would send out letters to alumni. We still send out letters to alumni. We would call alumni. We still call alumni. The overall art of advancement work is more or less the same. And so the objective here is to try to find ways to innovate in not just innovating, but innovate in finding better ways of keeping people connected to one another and alma mater. And I would say that starts with the president. And we've got a president who embraces innovation. She, from her very earliest days as president, has said, we evolve to preserve those things that we cherish. And if you don't evolve, you can't preserve those core things that you cherish, what matters the most to you. And so I've taken that on also with our team. I've been blessed with great colleagues, Dan being one of them over the years, who would bring ideas to me and I would say, let's try it. Let's give it a shot. Let's see what happens. Not all of them have worked, but enough of them have worked that it's allowed us to continue to be on the front edge, the leading edge of where we're going forward in the profession.
Yeah, I think it's an important inflection moment for us because it's really about a public view of the leading shops that have been doing this work for the last decade or more, not in terms of AI, but in terms of technology. So if you go back 15 years ago, predictive modeling was a foreign agent to institutional fundraising, but the best programs were doing it. Princeton had, could be wrong today, but when I looked at it over 10 years ago, Princeton had an army of data analysts before data science was really upon us. And then Matthew hired really one of the first data scientists to fuel the last campaign that William & Mary successfully accomplished. And that individual not just changed the landscape internally, but it also, I think, began to show other universities how we're tackling the use of data. Now we're at a point where you're doing things more publicly, and that's scary, especially when you're thinking about AI. It's a topic that trust is at the core of. It's important, but there's two types of AI, as we mentioned, and one is understandable enough, but the other is quite scary, which is when you're sitting in front of a non-human element engaging with alma mater, to what Matthew said, much the way that they've been accustomed to engaging. And then I know we'll talk about that today, but I think that's a transformational period for not just how we're doing our work, but the way our audience, our core audience, is actually beginning to see how we do our work. They didn't see predictive modeling for the last 20 years. They didn't see great marketing programs bring in Adobe or other type of internet-based tracking systems that allowed us to better and more effectively communicate with our base. Now they're seeing it and experiencing it.
Well, let's get into it, Dan and Matthew. I know that there's been some usage of similar tools at both of your advancement divisions. Can you talk about what you're currently exploring and utilizing and how that might be similar or different approaches being taken to that?
Let me jump in because it's actually unique that Matthew and I are doing this together because we're tackling the same tools, but we're also approaching them a little bit differently because our organizations are built differently. So one of the companies that Matthew and I worked on at William & Mary, over a decade ago was Give Campus. And Kestrel Linder is one of those rare doers in the industry. And that was a volunteer management system that was built. And that we've been working with Kestrel on a set of tools that focuses more on that back office use of AI and support. And then Matthew began working with another company that he'll talk about in a minute that we're also partnering with now. And that's more of an autonomous fundraiser entity.
Just a note about that. I mean, I think in our profession, there are some who view the vendors that we work with in a transactional fashion. And I think the two of us have always viewed the lack of innovation in our profession as an opportunity to bring partners in and I use the word partner intentionally here, that we want to work with partners who can really accelerate the work that we're doing. In higher ed, we're never going to have the resources or the technical prowess or the people to accomplish what some of our partners can do. And we've seen not just big tech firms that are creating things for the private sector and then adapting it for higher ed, but we've seen people that are really actually building tools for higher ed in the nonprofit sector. And so I remember vividly in the fall of 2022, I was beginning to hear the earliest sort of whisperings of the potential for generative AI to really do a lot. And I had sent an email to Kestrel Linder, the CEO of Give Campus, saying, what would it look like if we were to begin thinking creatively about using AI for some of the more mundane tasks that we do? For instance, contact reports. If you talk to any development officer about the least favorite part of their job, generally writing contact reports is up there in the top two. And Kestrel and his team took that and they ran with it. And with Dan and our colleague Megan Palumbo and several others here at William & Mary and the College of Charleston, within 9 months, there was a viable product that all of a sudden our gift officers were using to increase productivity and to more effectively do the work that they were doing. Again, that's a partnership where it's around trying to improve the experience at the edge of what our team was doing. The other person and company we work closely with is Adam Martell, who's the CEO of Givesy. And likewise, he was the founder of Gravity, which is one of the first firms years ago working on generated emails. And Adam came here to visit campus last summer, was meeting with our team, and he said, I'm thinking about doing something bigger in AI. Would you mind if I share that with your team? And he shared this concept of autonomous fundraisers. And the idea would be a truly autonomous AI agent would be working with a portfolio of individuals completely independently. And I would tell you that at least a third of our team gasped when he talked about this. And in particular, a number of our marketing communications colleagues who were just concerned about the implications of what this meant for the people doing that work. And now, 6 months later, literally just 6 months later, we're one of 13 institutions. William & Mary and the College of Charleston are two of these 13 institutions that just completed the first R&D cohort. And we've proven the concept that it's working, that these autonomous fundraisers are raising money. They are creating connections. They are stewarding donors. And that's fascinating. And we're proceeding in a thoughtful, careful manner to make sure that we do this well, we do this right. And we are doing it in a way that augments our team. I shared earlier just some of the numbers. We have right now about 24 open positions on our team. We can't hire fundraisers fast enough. As you know, there's a talent shortage out there. We can't hire marketing communications people fast enough. There's a talent shortage. And so to the extent we can use AI to expand the reach, it helps us with that labor shortage that we have across the advancement organization.
And the tools on the back end system or suite of solutions, they're similar in how we're using them. It's about being efficient. So the contact report's a perfect example of that, Dan. It takes me significantly less time. I used to voice dictate into my phone after leaving a meeting and then email it to myself, get back, read what the heck Siri thought I said, edit it, put it in the system. Now with that system, we can actually voice dictate into an app on our phone, and AI will clean it up. It will reorganize it. It will put it in a place that has objectives pulled out, next steps. And so it's infinitely less time. The autonomous side is where Matthew and I approach it very differently. Mine is activity. His is pipeline, I think, management and getting as many people touching those that are already philanthropically, culturally engaged. I'm trying to introduce our institution. Our participation rates are far different. That's a good way to explain it. But at the same time, it's also managing both of our efforts in a way that we don't have enough humans to be able to do. And we can share throughout today some real examples where, frankly, I was shocked just a couple of weeks ago where our autonomous fundraiser reminded me to do something that, as a human who's been raising money for 20 years, I should have known to do. And it was an opportunity that I would have missed had our autonomous fundraiser not taken it.
I think both of your divisions and cultures lean toward being at the innovation end of the spectrum. A lot of institutions are still playing catch up. I was embedded in Drexel's advancement division for almost 8 years and left at the end of last year. And they were getting ready to come back after the new year and embark on putting together a task force from representation of different teams in advancement to begin to explore how AI could be used and what tools and by whom and what are the guidelines. What are you seeing out there in terms of where your colleagues at other institutions are, and what advice would you give those schools that are just starting to embark on an exploration of AI?
Yeah. And I think I'd love to hear Matthew you've seen as well, because of the cohort specifically on the autonomous side with Givesy. I think they're about to move to their third cohort now. So I'm starting to watch how schools have approached it. First and foremost, Matthew mentioned this. You have to, I think, have a president that is willing to be risky and let you try, but appreciate the importance of innovation. I have a rocket scientist as a president, and so he certainly gets this. And you heard from Matthew about President Rowe at William & Mary. But then I think you have to have the team positioned in a way that values what you're doing is not necessarily addressing your immediate need. And, I've been fortunate to have Lori Soden at the College of Charleston. Lori worked with Adam Martell when Gravity went to the College of Charleston many, many years ago to begin its first element. And Lori and her team appreciate and understand that what we're doing today may not be raising money tomorrow, but it's certainly addressing the horizon concern. And so those, I think, have to be in place. And then certainly there's resource questions. There are colleagues I've talked to about looking at some of these products, and I've said, if you've got infinite elective dollars, you cannot afford not to do it. If you are down to a very precious few where you have to address tomorrow's need and today's need, you really need to evaluate it, take a look. And so I think there's all those factors, but what I guess I would say is leadership is important, cultural and understanding what we're trying to do matters, and then you've got to address what resources you have to play with this. But Matthew, what say you?
Think you know ChatGPT? Think again. Unlock advanced features like projects in Canvas at the AI Engage Summit's ChatGPT Secrets session on February 26. You'll be able to implement what you learn immediately. This free virtual event is a must attend. Register now at enrollify.org/engage.
Yeah, I would step back for a second and look at higher education broadly and then advancement more specifically. Last data I saw, the average presidency today is 6 years, and that number is going down each year. So you have relatively short tenures for presidents. And in institutional advancement, university advancement, similar tenure for a vice president. So somewhere in that sort of 5 to 7 years. And if you think about the average campaign being 8 to 9 years, what does that tell you? That the leadership is rarely in place for the entirety of a campaign, let alone multiple campaigns. And I would say for Dan and me, while your listeners probably can't see us, and even if they saw us, they might not agree, we're relatively young in the profession still. And when you take a long view, meaning more than one campaign, as an example, you start to think about what are some of the long-term needs that you have, not just short-term needs. Short-term needs would be around this year's annual giving numbers or this year's campaign numbers. But if you're really looking long-term, then you begin to invest much more heavily in marketing, much more heavily in communications, in alumni engagement, in annual giving, and some of those things that take a long time to see the ROI come out. I would say looking at innovation, looking at technology, looking at AI is not a short-term play. It really is a long-term play. And so one of the reasons we see relatively little of that is that our profession turns over so rapidly. And so to the extent we can encourage people to really dig into an institution, stay at an institution, grow at an institution, they are going to be much more inclined to look beyond the quarter or the year or the campaign, but to really look at a long-term period when they can really support that institution. And those leaders need to be able to invest, not just in the immediate short term, but invest in the long term.
Now, with opportunities come challenges, both internal and external. What are some of the hurdles that you've experienced in trying to explore greater adoption of AI, or that you see out there in the landscape as a whole for other colleagues?
I would do an internal and external. Internally, it's resources. I have a smaller team, as we said. I have a smaller advancement services shop. We've installed three new pieces of technology in the 2 years that I've been at the College of Charleston. And that has been, I know, and I recognize it regularly, a strain and a bear to our team. And so managing that is important. And you can counteract that in a way that says, yeah, there's no dollar results today, but there's credibility results. Our institution has a far greater level of credibility today. It also then helps when we're hiring, when we're recruiting, when we're attracting. It helps our donors to see that we're tinkering and we're thinking ahead and not just, so what Matthew has mentioned, thinking for the old long game. Externally, it has been, it's the debate, is this the new flash sizzle in the pan, or to Matthew's credit, this is the long game. I believe it's the long game. I believe it robustly improves our data, which means it robustly improves our ability to communicate and our ability to engage. But having that debate while you're building has been a challenge, both with board members, with donors as we've tested it, and then colleagues around the institution. Matthew's example of a percentage of his staff being aghast, I had the same when we said this at our cabinet level, that we're doing this. Folks, especially our alumni, were very worried because it is new, it is very public, and there's that trust element. And so those have been the two competing things. You got to stay laser focused on what you need to develop, but you've got all that noise around you that could easily get you to pull back, slow down, or maybe be a little bit less aggressive. We've been very careful. Our risks that we have taken have been calculated. Even when we've introduced the autonomous fundraiser, we're doing it in a test environment. We were using flat files right away. That's a huge level of protection on data security. It's also providing the ability for the human element to make sure that Dan is being called Dan and not Don, or that Matthew is being called Matthew and not Matt. Those are important things that we can do before we flip the switch, where there's truly an integrated flow.
Yeah, Dan's right. I would just add, our former foundation board chair often says there's a lot of things you could do with AI, but we need to be asking the question, should we be doing these things with AI? And I think in our profession, there's a whole lot of opportunity. There's always going to be questions around the ethics of what you're doing and how you're doing it. There's going to be questions around data security. Dan mentioned in our profession, data security is a huge part of what we've got to work through. And that is some of what really pushes us to move slowly on this to make sure we do it right and do it effectively. But on the could versus should, again, we have a labor shortage in the profession. We can't hire enough talented people right now. Every institution is searching for talented people. And so are there ways that we can augment and extend the reach of our staff? And are there ways that we can take some of those more tedious, less meaningful, less fulfilling functions and move those to the machines and let our people focus on the higher order functions?
Both of you have brought up autonomous opportunities for autonomous AI. Would love to dive into that more specifically now. Talk a little bit about the cohort and the work that you're doing with GiveZ, and kind of tie that to a key question that I think many of us, both in advancement or in higher ed marketing communications, are trying to understand right now, which is, how do you introduce these technologies and still maintain that authentic human connection? So there's an understanding, a transparency perhaps around when you're dealing with a real human versus an AI agent, for example, or getting that nuance, Dan, to your point of the data, the salutation correct, how that person prefers to be, their preferred name. How do you find those either small or large touches to ensure that human connectivity remains in place?
Yeah, I think over the years in our profession, we've gotten pretty good at one-to-many. And one-to-many would be your magazine that you send out. It'd be emails that you send out. It'd be text messages, letters. We've gotten better at personalizing those to the extent you're saying, Dear Dan versus Dear Friends or Dear Everyone in the universe. But the real move here is to do one-to-one, just the way any one of us would reach out individually to an alum or to a donor to engage them in conversation. And the transformation, and I don't use that word lightly, but the transformation here is that we've been able to develop autonomous fundraising partners. We call them VEOs, the virtual engagement officers, that are managing a portfolio of donors and potential donors and reaching out to them one-to-one, just as you or I might reach out one-to-one. To me, one of the most important elements here is trust. Trust is everything in our profession. And so we're not pretending, and we're not having the VEO reach out to people pretending to be a person. We are very clearly saying, in our case, our virtual engagement officer's name is Ren. Ren is reaching out and saying, "Dear Dan, I'm a virtual engagement officer at William & Mary, and I'd love to find ways that I can help you think about your own engagement, your connections, and your philanthropy with William & Mary." And I think what's been fascinating for me, in addition to the ability for these autonomous agents to genuinely connect with people, listen to people, adapt based on what the person is asking them or what they're requesting, it is stirring up a lot of the content that our marketing communications teams have created over decades. We've created this in such a way, and Gibbsy has really trained the AI only on our universe, on our websites, on our allowed websites that we have. And so the autonomous fundraiser is digging through all of the information on our website and pulling up some fascinating stories, some fascinating videos, some sort of little tidbits and vignettes that many of us had forgotten about. But for instance, in our case, Ren was reaching out to an alum who had supported entrepreneurship. And she found a video of our director of the Entrepreneurship Hub talking about how we are teaching entrepreneurship, and shared that with the person. And it led to a deeper connection, to ultimately a philanthropic gift. But it is very early stages, but really amazing to see that these autonomous agents are able to have conversations back and forth in multiple languages and different ways of engaging. Dan's got a great story about a poem that his VEO created. But the real fascinating thing here is that this is one-to-one, not just one-to-many.
Yeah, and for the folks that are familiar with more marketing, aspects of our life, this was the forerunner to this in my mind, with journey-based marketing, journey-based email campaigns. And I approached Matthew maybe 8 or 9 years ago with the idea of we should develop a journey-based email campaign. And that still took the human to plan a 12-month email campaign, all rooted in if, what, then what. Meaning you engage with us, you've got the next chapter. The autonomous fundraiser is doing that in the now. And so the poem aspect is one of those, where we had an alumnus ask the test AI to test the VEO, and ours is named Alex. Can you write me a poem? And Alex quickly wrote a poem that very much was rooted in the live oaks and some of the historic parts of the College of Charleston grounds. The other example I'll share briefly, to Matthew's point about entrepreneurship, that's an example where truly the journey-based campaign still could have figured that out. They could have said, if Dan responds to this email, let's send Dan a follow-up email with a link to this YouTube. It still would have meant that staff would have had to find it. This was what I alluded to the other day. College of Charleston City of Charleston had a meteorological anomaly the other day. We had measurable snow on the historic peninsula. Our Alex sent out notes to those in their portfolio, basically saying that the city was shut down, pulled off the inclement weather statement, but then turned it into how magical the campus must look, and asked that portfolio respondent to tell us a time that you saw snow, or tell us a time that was magical to you on the College of Charleston's campus. I'm reading this and went, my Lord, I've got to go take photos of our historic grounds snow covered, because my own donors in my own portfolio would probably appreciate it. That's something that as a fundraiser should be second nature, to find those magical moments and attach the donors that you work with to, and the autonomous fundraiser beat me to it.
Can you talk a little bit about what the next step with the virtual engagement officers are? If there's a particular goal or an expectation, what does sort of the second phase of its journey look like at each of your institutions?
Yeah, so we tested in a very conservative way. We have 1,000 donors working with ours right now, 1,000 entities working with ours right now. They're mixes of live buns and side buns, and mainly our live ones are those that made gifts through an event registration. So they are probably the closer to non-donor than live population. So very, very safe. We are now moving into the exploration of putting them in front of evergreen donors or stewardship portfolios, not because they're safe, but because those are the donors that, frankly, if we can convert their annual gift, and I'm talking thousands at $5,000 donors, if we can convert them annually, that's great because the staff can now focus elsewhere. We're also exploring major gift portfolios at this point because we just don't have enough individuals to manage all of our staff, all of our prospective donors and current donors that are rated to be major gift. So we have two options. We put them in a holding pool where they collect cobwebs and we hope that a staff member can get to them one day, or we go ahead and test this with an autonomous fundraiser.
And we have, as I said earlier, a fully integrated advancement operation. And so our university marketing team has responsibility for enrollment marketing. We have career services on our team. And so our president's really encouraged us to see, as we continue to get better and better at the engagement and fundraising side of this, how could we use our VEO to help with yield in the enrollment cycle? So after a prospective student has been offered admission, could the VEO connect with that student and offer insights into particular majors or student organizations or social life or any of the number of ways that a prospective student might be trying to understand a little bit more about William & Mary as they're making their decision? Could be on the front end also, it's a possibility. And then on the career front, we know one of the hurdles to student success and getting the internship and careers they want is getting them in the door to sit down and talk to a career coach. And so could we imagine using our VEO to help students explore potential internships? What are your interests, your academic interests, and what are some of the internships and jobs that might connect into there? And ultimately for me, what success looks like is the handoff from the VEO to a person. So can she, Ren, or can our future VEOs get that individual, whether it's an alum or a donor or a prospective student or a current student, to connect to a human being to take the next step? And I think that's a huge goal for us. Obviously, we want to see her raising more money with that same portfolio than she did last year. But can we really move to that handoff? And so as we think about, your staffing plan for the year ahead, we see more of these VEOs as a part of the future for us, of really trying to, again, augment the reach of our staff.
All right, great. Well, I'm going to bring it back home here for a second. We've covered a lot of ground. We've talked about sort of the state of advancement today and how each of your divisions are structured and how you're exploring different types of technologies and from historical to the present and kind of bleeding edge with virtual engagement officers. We talked a little bit about earlier what advice you might give to others out there. And I want to look back to that because there are so many that are beginning this journey and at the senior level, all the way down to your early career advancement professionals who are trying to figure out on an everyday basis, how do I use ChatGPT to increase the productivity of my work? So do you have any final closing advice for either individual practitioners or teams or divisions or institutions as a whole about the opportunity around AI for advancement or marketing communications work?
To quote the great song, "Don't Fear the Reaper." And I think, our opportunity here is to really try and experiment and to dip your toes into it. For a lot of people who haven't even tried ChatGPT yet, they'll be amazed at the ability to continually refine and get better as you're moving forward. We are, as I said, going to have more and more challenges in the years ahead, recruiting and retaining the kinds of great people we want. And so how do we use AI to augment our staff and find ways to make the jobs that we have even more interesting, even more complex, even more fulfilling? We in the higher ed space and the nonprofit space, we're here to do good. And in theory, everything we're doing at the university is to advance the work of our students and our faculty and our people. So how do we use the tools that we have at our disposal to do good? I reflect back years ago when I started in this profession, checks were the currency that we all worked in. You worked with donors via checks. And then we began to see credit cards become much more popular. For a subset of people, they still refused to use a credit card because it didn't feel safe or right to them. So they still wrote checks, but a number of people did. And that dramatically came to overshadow checks. And now digital wallets, Apple Pay, Venmo, PayPal, you name it, are overshadowing both of them. And so the key here, again, is to try and see what works. Similarly with text messages, there were a lot of people that said there's no way we could ever possibly send text messages to our alums and donors. And over time, we've learned that can be successful for a subset of our population. So autonomous agents are not going to be right for everyone. Not every donor or alum is going to want that. But for those that do want it, it can be a very fulfilling experience. It can be another way to get them connected to your people. So let's just try and experiment and see if we can improve the work we do in our profession.
And I won't quote a song, but I'll quote Dr. Seuss. If you never did, you should. These things are fun and fun is good. And I think that's a rare moment that we have to try to do, to build. And I think those that go through it, and it's not going to always be fun. It's not going to always be easy. But when we get through it, we're going to be on the front line, I think, of changing an industry that, frankly, 20 years ago, this would be more than a fable. So,
well, I thank you both. You've done a great job there of trying to help dispel maybe some of the fear that's associated with the opportunity around this technology. Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, your insights, and helping us launch the series in such a rich manner. It's important that all of our higher ed colleagues understand the opportunity around this technology and how it can help advance what we do for our profession and for our constituents that we serve. So also for our listeners, be sure to subscribe to this series so you don't miss the rest of the Pulse Check. We've got 4 more episodes that'll be coming out on a weekly cadence where we'll continue to explore AI's impact on advancement. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.
The Higher Ed Pulse is part of the Enrollify Podcast Network. If you like this podcast, chances are you'll like other Enrollify shows too. Our podcast network is growing by the month, and we've got a plethora of marketing, enrollment, and higher ed technology shows that are jam-packed with stories, ideas, and frameworks, all designed to empower you to be a better higher ed professional. Our show helps higher ed marketers and admission pros find their next big idea and features a selection of the industry's best as your hosts. Learn from Brian Gross, Eddie Francis, Jenny Lee Fowler, and so many of your favorite leaders in higher ed. Enrollify is made possible by Element 451, the next generation AI student engagement platform, helping institutions create meaningful and personalized interactions with students. Learn more at element451.com.